Hey, what's going on? It's Doug Cunnington here, and I am going to show you how I write a blog post. And we're going to go through a few steps. We'll talk about some prerequisites as well. I think we have some folks on live, which is fantastic. Let me know if you could hear me. I think that you can. I'm sorry that I'm a few minutes late. I have been experimenting and testing and trying to do these live streams in 4K, which also unfortunately requires me to change a couple camera settings, and then the particular camera I have doesn't autofocus very well. So I put it on manual focus, and I've taken the feedback from some of the fine folks here in the audience for some additional lighting back there. So I did have a little bit of lighting in the past. I have experimented and I wasn't 100% sure how I wanted to do it. But these seem to look okay. I wasn't 100% sure before, and it's still a work in progress. I think the studio here will continually evolve. It's been pretty fun the last couple days here. I've been doing a lot of interviews. So some with my friends like Alex Cooper over at WP Eagle. I chatted with him yesterday, and Shauna Newman from Skip Blast. But I also did an in-person interview for my other podcast called the Mile High Fi. So I had like four people in the mix here, which was pretty fun. Well, four people total. My podcast host, co-host, and myself. We had two guests, which it was pretty fun. So, all right, people can hear us. Mike, what's up? Eric and Samuel, Balil, what's going on? So, what we're gonna do today is I'm gonna share my screen coming up here in a minute or two, and then I'll just kind of go through the process of writing a blog post. I'm not going to write the whole thing, but I'm actually going to like pick a topic. And I was trying to figure out what topic that I wanted to choose, and it was, well, I want to pick something I'm interested in, and maybe I'll learn something along the way. So I've been talking a lot about guitars lately, and you can see my new guitar over here, which I'm not even going to try and focus it over there. Oh, you know what? I'll bring it closer. I'll be right back. I know some people actually said it looked like a fake studio, but I could walk back there. You can see. See, it's real. It's real. So here's the new guitar. This nice Gibson LG2 for the people that like guitars. You could see that it's pretty nice. Really enjoy it. And I hopefully I won't drop it. That would be terrible. So the topic that we'll choose today is something about guitars. So we won't do the keyword research or anything like that. However, the keyword and the topic that you're going to write about is critical for your article. So you should have that in mind. Now, that's a whole other set of training, which I think I did it last week. So I put a link in the show notes and description here so that you can go and check that out if you want to get a refresher on keyword research. And in that session, I actually used a free tool called Ubersuggest, and there's a paid version of it. But I did demonstrate why you should probably get a paid tool. You can get some information from a tool that's free like Ubersuggest, but you're very limited. You can only do 3 searches per day, and then the data that you get is not the full scope of what you really need. So basically, you need to have a topic in mind, and I'm just going to pick one. Maybe we'll do just very light keyword research, because the way these sessions go, apparently, maybe there's an email blast that happens about 30 minutes in. If there are a handful of people, like you find folks like Samuel, Balil, Hussein, Sharik, NK, Snazzy, and Cheesecake, Jason's on as well. So if there are people on and you folks are enjoying it, that's great, number one. But I think YouTube sends out a notification while I'm live, because last week almost to the minute. At 30 minutes, a lot more people hopped on, and it just kind of skyrocketed. This So the challenge is it means I need to do a good job up to 30 minutes, and then I need to do even better. But I'll honestly, people that show up here early, I'm going to try and give you the best. All right. So I'm going to try to make the first 30 minutes the best, and then we'll go from there. So thanks everyone for hopping on, and we're just going to go through it. You'll get to see, number one, how poor I type. Number two, the sort of slow process that we go through. And it's going to appear slower. It's actually going to be slower since I'm trying to talk and do the live stream at the same time. So I definitely encourage you in the chat to, talk amongst yourself. Actually, I'm interested, and we can get a little discussion going for some current events. I know that recently here in June, there has been a Google Core Web Vitals update. So feel free, everyone, if you've had experience with this, if you've had any traffic increases or dips or anything like that, would love to hear about it here. So with that said, I'm going to start jumping into it here. And Abdel Kabar says, do we save the live? So yeah, basically what happens with all YouTube live streams is they are generally by default made into just regular videos right afterwards. So you can rewind it. So, and just watch the same part again as I'm recording the last part of it. Jacqueline says, do I do the live streams at the same time every week? Up until the last 2 weeks, the answer is yes. I was doing them at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays, 1 o'clock Mountain Time on Wednesdays, Jacqueline. And this last couple weeks, my schedule has shifted a little bit, and I've moved this live stream around. So what I do is send out an email. So everyone that's here right now, I've mentioned it like 100 other times, sign up for my email list if you're not on it. There's a link in the description, nichesiteproject.com. Click the green button, enter your name and email address, and then I send out emails whenever I go live. Usually I'll send it out either the day of, several hours ahead of time, or I'll send it out the day before if I'm planning ahead, which I should be. Now, there's going to be a time coming up, well, it's later this year, but I'm going to take a little time off, and I probably won't do the same live streams. But I'll let people know via the email list. Okay. So let's share my screen, and let's look at writing a blog post. So this should work here. Looks like it did work. Great. And I think potentially I'll zoom in a little bit here, and then can I drag it over? Perfect. So we do have some prerequisites that we have to think of here. So number one, you obviously, hopefully, you need to know what you're going to write about. And that is all about keyword research and understanding what the topic is. So if you don't know what you're writing about and you think, hey, I need to publish a blog post, you hop on over to WordPress or some other CMS. Maybe you're writing in Google Docs, whatever. If you don't know what you're writing about and you show up to a blank screen with the cursor blinking, it potentially will be overwhelming and it'll be hard to write, and it's just a little too much pressure. So don't do that. You should know what keyword you're targeting. You should know the topic. If you don't know anything about the topic, then you should probably do some research. All right. So you should have some idea about things to cover. So we will actually look at some of this late research ourselves. So the topic that we'll pick for this is how to purchase a vintage guitar. So I have been looking at vintage guitars. So I showed you my new Gibson there, and that is a new one, but they actually have kind of like really old ones, and I'll come back to the full screen. They have really old ones, and I'm looking at these sort of smaller bodied because I have short arms. You can't tell, but I'm more like a T-Rex is my physique more than anything else. You know, not as many teeth. Short arms is what I mean. So I'm looking at these small bodied parlor acoustic guitars. So we're going to focus in sort of in that area. But as I got a new guitar and I started doing research, and I found the rich history of some of these older guitars, which an acoustic guitar sounds better as it ages. So they have some that are 50, 60, 90, 100 years old. Like literally they're 100 years old. And some of those very old ones, they were made with wood that was already very old. So you end up with potentially like a 90-year-old guitar that has wood that's 100, 150 years old. Pretty insane when you think about it. So, and they sound great. They sound fantastic. I've been watching a ton of YouTube videos. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And shout out to David in the chat, who is keeping order over there. So he's one of our fine moderators. So thanks to David and the other moderators out there. Okay, so let's hop back, and I will share my screen in just a second. How to buy a vintage. Oh, actually, this is a little interesting here. So how to buy a vintage, and there's all these different things listed here. So very, very interesting. You potentially could have, oh, and you can't see the auto suggest and drop down. Let me put it here. How to buy a vintage guitar, watch, blah, da, 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 da. So all these different ideas right here. So you could actually probably do a website on like vintage things. How would you monetize that? Well, that's another story. But I could tell you, all right, we'll say how to buy a vintage guitar, and we'll hone in on acoustic. So we're going to do light research here. The other thing you'll see is I have a tool that I use called Keywords Everywhere. It's relatively inexpensive. So if you're looking for an economic tool, and it tells us, let me zoom out here. So it tells us the search volume right here, which is 0 for this particular term. However, it is a Google auto suggest, so I do know that people are searching for it. Now, one kind of cool thing is we see immediately acoustic guitar forum is what is listed here. And this is sort of the preliminary research, so we can get kind of an idea of what's going on. Now, luckily, I tried to choose a topic that I was generally familiar with, but we're going to go a little bit deeper today. So we'll open up this result. I'm just going to open these in new tabs. People also ask is an interesting thing to get into. And then vintage guitars. This is over reverb.com, which I'll talk about in a second. And how to buy a used guitar. Ask the expert over at acoustic guitar. So that should be enough to get started. But quick note from a monetization standpoint, one place to buy used gear and actually new gear is Reverb. And I think Reverb probably blew up a little bit over the past year or so with COVID, because these brick and mortar shops, these brick and mortar music stores and guitar shops, they generally had to close. They had to, well, like everything, they had to close. So they want to sell their shit. And the other thing is, people wanted to buy guitars. So I talked to the owner over at a pretty nice music shop, guitar shop called Wildwood Guitars. Should have wore that shirt today. Wildwood Guitars down in Louisville. And he said business is blowing up. Like they are selling so much. I don't know if they're making more now. One would assume, right? Because they don't have to run the shop and all that stuff. But basically, these brick and mortar shops needed to sell online. So my hunch is Reverb probably grew a lot and had a lot more things offered on there. Now, I'm going to hop back on. The reason why I'm mentioning that is with vintage gear, they're not selling it on Amazon. Where are they selling it? They're selling it on places like Reverb. So you could be an affiliate for Reverb. They have a whole affiliate program. In fact, in some of my mild obsession researching this stuff, I ran across some YouTube and podcasts that cover vintage gear and just instrument topics, right? Mostly guitar stuff, of course, but they just go to Reverb and talk about things that are for sale. They're literally like featuring the gear that's for sale. They don't know anything extra about it. They just start talking about the entry that's there. It's kind of like eBay. It's just musical instruments. They have DJ stuff, drums, other recording gear, but you could like just feature a specific guitar or mention a search page, for example. I've had a site and I tried to sell a few things on eBay. So I would just list a specific search as my affiliate link versus a specific product, because a specific product hopefully is going to sell. But anyway, that is one sort of business line that you could have. Of course, you could run display ads, which may be the superior way. So this is the preliminary research phase. So we're just kind of going to go through. So we have a forum, which, let's face it, I mean, forums are going to be kind of a mess. There's going to be like tons of information, differing opinions. So this is going to be a little bit harder to glean any real conclusions. We'll just scroll down and see if there's anyone that lists things out in like bullet points or anything that seems easy to read. No, not really. So let's move on to Reverb, which this is extremely well written and it is concise and straightforward. They have a table of contents, so we kind of know how we should structure it. And you'll notice very quickly, I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. You'll notice quickly they did a very smart thing. They just have a list of frequently asked questions. That is the table of contents. That is how they structured this content here. So when we look at some of the topics here, we get a definition. So what is a vintage guitar? What should I know? How much do originality and condition matter? What vintage guitars are worth the most? Where do the dealers get it? The market fared over the years. What does the future hold? What's my guitar worth? And where can I learn more about vintage guitars? And just that alone provides us with almost all the common questions that you would need to consider for buying a vintage guitar. So is that all we need to do? Can we just like snag these questions and then move forward? Well, not only would that be lazy, it would be highly derivative of exactly what this piece of content is. However, there's some good stuff here. So, we're doing light research right now. So I'm just going to hop over here and I'm going to paste that in. I believe it's helpful. And this is a good set. So I'm just going to also list where this came from so that it's very clear. All right, so this is, part of the light research. If you already know the topic pretty well, then you could probably just list out the questions that you can think of yourself. Let me zoom out here. So this is on guitar noise, and if I scroll down, you can see a bunch of B&H ads. I haven't looked at B&H in a while. So one thing I notice here is there's not a table of contents. So we'll have to look through, and then also just in general, I'm no designer, but the formatting is a little bit off. These lines are super long. Sure would love to see. It's just a little bit harder to read when the lines are really long. I don't know if anyone else gets that sort of feeling. So we have still, pretty good sort of headings here, but they don't even actually use headings. So we have the wood ages, the sound matures, So that was the point that I made before. 2, used guitars are a lot cheaper than what they are for retail isn't uncommon. So quick note, the vintage things that we're looking at, they're actually, or the ones that I'm looking at, they are, in the 30s and 40s, basically. So generally, those were sold for way cheaper. They were not very expensive back then. So here we have, most guitars don't get used that much. The design of the guitar hasn't changed. That's true. If there's something satisfying about bringing the guitar home, used guitars are not like used cars. The woods that are available in older guitars are not available now, like Brazilian rosewood. That's true. They use that a lot in the fingerboards, I think. All right, then we have older guitars are handmade. How does it look? Okay, things to look for. Make sure the neck has a truss rod. So these are getting more into the nuts and bolts of how to choose and select an acoustic vintage guitar. So this stuff is very good. And what I'm not going to list out all the things there, but since it's not as easy to copy and paste, but what I will say is it's actually, how to select and what to look out for. So this article here probably will have more information, more specific information, especially for choosing the guitar and things you should think about before you make an offer over on Reverb. Next, this is Acoustic Guitar Magazine, and let's see what they have here. So ask the expert how to shop for a used guitar. So as we scroll down, unfortunately, we do not see a table of contents, but pretty good information overall. Couple little mentions, fairly short and concise. So that is one nice advantage here. It is short and concise. So if we wanted to go and read that, then you could. Now, I'm going to hop back over here and just look at the overall process. As you can see, we just did the sort of light research to get an idea, understand some of the buzzwords perhaps, and to just see what's out there. We looked at about 4 different posts, so nothing crazy, but we looked at a few posts out there. So as I mentioned before, you don't want to show up and then think, what topic am I writing about? And you start typing a blank document. The easiest way to get started is to know what you're going to write about. So hopefully you've done that keyword research previously. There's a link in the description that has a link. There's a link in the description to the keyword research training that I did a week ago. So you can check that out if you need a refresher. Once you have some preliminary ideas, write an outline. This is the most important part. Write the outline. When you write the outline, you're essentially writing what the subheadings would be. Now, the good part, for the folks that are reading ahead a little bit, the good part, you realize none of this is permanent. This is all very flexible. It's meant to be changed. You can adapt, and it's encouraged for you to edit it and change it. So just because you write the outline in a certain way doesn't mean you have to keep it that way. You can change sections around. You can move subheadings and subtopics from one area to another. You can change the whole thing if you want to. But it helps a lot because you can just get sort of the main ideas out of your head. If you were to just sit down and you didn't know what you were going to write yet, you may start at what seems to be the logical point at the very beginning. You start typing, maybe you define what a vintage acoustic guitar is. Maybe you give some examples, and then you just start talking about what you should pay. And then you realize, well, I need to mention the condition of them. And you end up with sort of a stream of consciousness that may not flow in the most organized way. And then if your brain works like mine, hopefully it doesn't, but if yours works like mine, then you might think of some new topics to add to something you already wrote. And then if you just added it there, you end up with, again, some sort of weird stream of consciousness. So if you write the outline, you're not committing too much, but you get the basic structure down. Then you could come back to it. Maybe you do a little more research for each one of the subheadings as much as needed. You may not need to do that. You may need to get a ton of resources for something you don't know anything about. But if you happen to know a lot about it, you may not have to go and find resources and do the research and all that stuff. So once you have the outline in place and you have your thoughts and you have your references that you can go check out, you're in great shape then. Then you could focus on writing. You can essentially fill out that outline. And you don't have to, let's say you're targeting 1,800 words. I just made that up. Let's say you're targeting 1,800 words because you see most of the articles out there are between 1,500 and 2,000 words that are ranking in the top 10. So you aim for 1,800, kind of in the middle there. So you may make a first pass through and end up at 1,000 words. That's great. Maybe that's all the time you have for that day. Maybe that's just what you ended up at. You're not tracking it specifically. You don't have a specific word count for each section or anything like that. And you end up with 1,000 words. And you're going to need to come back and add 800 more. At that point, maybe you can go take a break. Maybe it's the next day and you come back to it, something like that. You sleep on it. I don't know what your work structure is, but basically you end up at some point and then you can come back and add more. So you can also see, I wrote 8 steps here and there are some repeats. 2 of those steps are taking a break and stepping away from it. Now, for me personally, it's pretty important to get away from whatever it is I'm working on. And even if it's only for 30 minutes or so, go for a walk, stop thinking about it, distract yourself. And I do actively want to think about something else. So I may go work out, I may watch TV and just do something that will occupy my mind. I find it very helpful to stop thinking about it directly. Then when you come back, you sort of have fresh eyes. You have a little space in between, which again, for me, super helpful. So at that point, you can edit, you can write more, you can you do those interchangeably. Sometimes you edit it and you end up adding a few hundred words. Maybe you figure out, hey, there's a whole other section here that I figured out while I was not thinking about writing more. It's kind of weird how that works out. So after you go through a couple of these edit and writing segments here, then you can publish it. Of course, a lot of folks know that is not the end of, any of the changes or anything like that. You can go back and edit it again. You can add more. If you have a niche where, it doesn't really apply for vintage guitars, they're not creating new ones. They're not creating new vintage guitars. That's kind of the mystique, right? They're not making any more. You can't make more of those guitars from the 1940s. So the point here is you can always go back and add if there's new information, something like that. If you learn something new, then you can go back and add. Now, if you're in a different niche or something like that, where there's new products, let's say you're in the laptop niche, then of course you can go. There's going to be new laptops like every month. And you can add those to your article. Maybe there's some sort of new fancy memory that uses some new technology or something like that. You can add more information there. So none of this is permanent. Even after you hit publish, you can always go back and change and update things. So let's think about outlining. So, part of this is you could see how I'm going to work and all that stuff. And I'm going to hop over and just check to see if we do have any questions. out there at this time. So we have, all right, and Sharik is asking about Core Web Vitals. Different topic, different day. I'm probably going to do some videos on site speed and Core Web Vitals soon. So thanks for asking. That is not the scope of what we're talking about today. Unrelated to content. All right. Ditya says, is an amp necessary? So I think maybe you were trying to contribute to the outline or something like that. So sure, we can. Actually, that's too basic. So one thing that I know, because I understand this niche. So if someone is researching for vintage acoustic guitars, they are probably fairly knowledgeable. They've probably already have a guitar. A casual person does not, a casual non-guitar owner doesn't say, oh, you know what, I was thinking about buying something I know nothing about at all and get a vintage one. So I would not include is an amp necessary. And I'll mention this because I've seen content from some of the writing agencies. So I sample a lot of services, and one of the services, they had the equivalent of that question. So it would be like defining what an acoustic guitar is. So if someone's looking for a vintage acoustic guitar, you wouldn't have to tell them what a guitar is. And some of the content that I got back basically had, unfortunately, it had some very simple definitions so that if an actual person like me who was interested in vintage guitars, if I landed on a page that said, is an amp necessary, I would think they don't know what they're talking about. And I wouldn't have any trust in the content there because they missed the mark. So I would be cautious to put that in there. Now, Aditi, I know you were just trying to contribute and help for this outline. But in this case, unlike other live streams that I've done, I'm not looking for input for the outline in this case, because I want to show you what I would do for the outline. So Dan gives a shout out to Keywords Everywhere. Oh, and just Aditya, thanks for your contribution. I wasn't knocking anything like that. I was just going through the thought process of this specific keyword and the person that would be interested in reading the article. They would not be a newbie to guitars. All right. Zane asks about the conclusion. Cool. We'll get to that. We'll go through there for sure. And Devish says, how do you cover the keyword in the content? Devish also says, how to include targeted keyword in the content, mean the frequency. So don't even worry about that. The one piece of advice that I could tell you is you should probably ignore the Yoast SEO plugin for keyword density. Typically, I don't think about it too much. I would write the article normally, like a normal person, and then potentially I would use a tool like Market Muse or Page Optimizer Pro to have a look at what they suggest for the keyword frequency. But I don't worry about it too much other than not overusing the keyword. So Devish, I encourage you to do that. And further, Devish is saying, how do you, please show an example to naturally include a keyword in the content. So one great thing that you can do is look at what is already out there. So I'm not going to write the whole blog post today. Probably just write a couple little sections here. It would be pretty boring to watch me struggle through it. But what you can do is go to a best in class type site, look at big ones, look at small ones. So go look at the Wirecutter. Now, it's kind of an anomaly, right? It's a big site. They have a lot going on. So you can't necessarily go and emulate exactly what they are doing. But you can find other smaller sites that are, say, under a year old or so, and see what they're ranking for, and have a look at their content, and then you could check the keyword density for them. Now, let me see if I'm going to be able to do this for you here. Give me one sec, because I might be able to show you something pretty cool. All right. Yes, I am able to. So let me share my screen. So another shout out to Keywords Everywhere here. I'm not an affiliate. I don't even think they have a program, but it is one of the cheaper tools. And Dan said that he likes it as well. So I'm on this Reverb vintage guitar FAQ. I went to the Keywords Everywhere extension and clicked on the Analyze Page Content. And then it shows a keyword density analysis. So it is 3,000 words. We can see all the different metrics. It shows you search volume and all this other stuff. And basically, we can let's look at the 3-word phrases. So vintage guitar market, learn more about, blah, blah, blah. So you can see the density of certain words, phrases, as it were. So basically, what I'm telling you, Devish, is don't worry about it too much, and then you can go and research the competition, hopefully sites that are similar to yours, similar in age, and then you can see generally what keyword density they have. You don't want to overdo it. That's the big thing. That's one of the main issues, especially if you're doing keyword golden ratio type keyword research or other long tail keyword research. You're going to end up keyword stuffing if you use the keyword like 5 times. So let's say it's a 6-word phrase. It's a frequently asked question, for example, and you put it in the title, you have a subheading with it, then you use it in the copy 3 times. That's way too much. You don't need to write it that many times. Google's pretty smart at understanding what people are trying to talk about just in general through the other words that are used. And again, Google's pretty smart with that stuff, and they understand the user intent. So you don't have to hit people over the head with a keyword phrase over and over and over again. Right? It's just too much. So anyway, you can look at the competition there. Now, quick note before we hop into the actually, writing the outline and then writing a couple other things, and of course the conclusion as well. Quick shout out to Ezoic. They sponsor these live streams, so you should check them out. There's a link in the show notes. They have a tool called Leap. All right, so for the person that was asking about the core web vitals, Leap sort of addresses all of that. Helps your site load faster, provides a good user experience, and there's not really a sort of one size fits all. You say, oh, what can I do to fix everything? There's a lot of different issues that you can run into. So you end up in a position where you can't recommend a specific plugin. So Leap looks at all the different components, and it's free if you're using Ezoic to monetize your site. There's no minimum page view limit. So even if you have a brand new site, you can still use Ezoic. The link is in the description. And for the people that might be thinking, hey, what about the Site Speed Accelerator? Leap replaces it. It's more effective, and it should be, it's just a simpler implementation. There's no paid components, or it's just one thing you can get if you're monetizing with Ezoic. So shout out to them. The other thing I need to mention is ODYS, and that is ODYS Global. They're another sponsor of the show. I think I can scroll this thing over too. And this is the featured domain for today. This is Yoga Anonymous or Yoga Anonymous. I had trouble pronouncing it, but this is a sweet age, domain, really tight branding. They do include the logo here. So it's been impressive with ODYS, ODYS.global, that they include a logo and they actually fit pretty well with whatever the niche is. It's funny. I would imagine this being on a website. So this particular site, let's scroll down. It's a .org, which is pretty cool. And it covered events, diets, music, locations, and tutorials. So it's really kind of a lifestyle situation. 12 years old. Got a cough. You could, of course, monetize with accessories from Amazon or other yoga online e-commerce situations. And I actually really have to cough now. It's just if I talk too long, it's too much. All right. The links are fantastic. You got Wall Street Journal here, New York Times, Huffington Post, worldoffemale.com. What is that? Mind, Body, Green. Kick-ass links overall. Yoga Journal. Some of these I can't read, but pretty fantastic links. And the idea here is you can get this domain, essentially shortcut the whole sandbox situation. 12 years old. Looking at 2009. I'm going to pass out here in a second. I'm trying to fight through it. It's perfect to happen during the live ad read, right? There's nothing I can do. Got a power on. It actually does get a little bit of traffic, which is a little bit crazy. Let's see for the last month here. Yeah, so if you don't have an account over at ODYS, there's hundreds of domains. Different languages are available. This just happens to be the one that I'm featuring and kind of focus on the English market. And SEO metrics, this is the important stuff. So DR21, there are 204 referring domains. It's indexed in Google. The DA is 34. So if you're in the yoga space already, or if you're thinking, hey, I wanted to start a site with yoga, this would be a perfect one. There's tons of informational topics you can cover. There are online courses, communities, other ways to monetize. So check it out. If you join with my affiliate link, then you can get $100 into your account. Some of these domains start at under $1,000. So that is I think some of them are in the sort of in the mid range. So 500-600. I've seen some pretty good deals. And I was talking to a friend the other day. He was able to pick up a domain. It was just a DR12, right? Just a DR12, able to grow traffic really quickly. I can't remember if it was 6 or 8 months, but 100,000 visitors per month in 6 or 8 months. Tons of informational topics that he was able to cover. And again, it was just a DR of 12. So just think about that for a second. Had some age. I think it was 5-6 years old, something like that. All right. So thanks to ODYS, another sponsor. Now let's start writing this post. So first we're going to outline it. So we'll hop back over here. And I'm going to go look at our late research. So we're going to focus on acoustic, right? So how to buy a vintage acoustic guitar. And let's go to a new page here. So how to buy a vintage acoustic guitar. And then we'll go from there. So we're going to write the outline, and I'll literally, use the numbered list so I can have the hierarchy of the article. So first, I do like, what is vintage? So, because really, I think it's technically anything older than 25 years old. All right, so 25 years old, and then an antique is over 100 years old, I think, per definition, but we're just talking about vintage. All right. I am also thinking of examples. So it could be cool to have some examples in here, and maybe we can divide it by brand. So we'll say Gibson, Martin. I happen to know these brands. I've seen some, Kalamazoo. Is that how you spell it? Yeah, Kalamazoo. Martin, I saw Washburn and Harmony. Okay, so that's enough to get started. And I mean, you can kind of blast through this. The outline can be and should be fairly quick most of the time. So we have some examples. What else should we cover in here? So what to look for? Oh, maybe like where. So where can you buy these? And we can say local shops. You can say chain stores and talk about the pros and the cons. And those would be like Guitar Center or Sam Ash or something like that. And then you have online, and we'll just mainly cover that as Reverb, but technically, yeah, we'll say Reverb, eBay, and maybe private sellers in some capacity. All right, so that is where to buy. And then it would be what to look out for. So what to look out for. And that is where one of these other references that we found is going to be really helpful. So let's actually look back. And so what should I know when buying a vintage? So these are actually very good questions here. How much do originality and condition matter? So, and this is pretty similar. So what should I look out for, and what should I know when buying a vintage guitar? So those are pretty similar. So I'll just take my shorter phrase out. Then we have, where did dealers get it? How is the market fared? Okay. Yeah, so actually all four of these are pretty good. And that is one of the big advantages for doing that preliminary research. Again, we don't want it to be completely derivative, and just because we get the question, right? I only looked at the table of contents there. I didn't look at the actual content. So whatever I write here is going to be different. It's going to probably a different structure. It'll have my own particular, biases. It'll also have some of the other things that I think are important. Now, sure, it'll probably be good for me to go and do some research after I write it, but that is one thing I like to do, is to just write what I know and then maybe go back and do further research if I feel like this section needs more information or something like that. And the other part is, actually, let me come back to the full screen. The other part is, so we did some very light research, but another way to do this is to do heavy research and spend an hour reading as much as you can on the topic. Maybe you find a book. Maybe there's a book that exists at the library, for example. You go check it out. You read, you understand in a lot more depth. A book is so much more in depth than a blog post typically. Not always, but most of the time. So if there's a book on the topic, or maybe a magazine, right? So I know that there are vintage guitar magazines or something very similar. So you could go and buy a magazine. You can get the back archive and actually check them out. So this acousticguitar.com, it is a magazine, right? So they have those, and we just looked at a very small, what would be a column in the magazine, but you can do a lot more research. And if you do that heavier research, you'll have a lot more to write, and you'll be able to synthesize something original from all the different sources that you're looking at. And at that point, I mean, you really are becoming an expert in the topic because you're doing so much research on it. All right, so back to the outline. So what's my guitar worth? So what should I know? How much originality? Okay, so we can take a little vote here, and I'll answer a couple questions, but I think I'm just going to write maybe like one section here, or at least the part of one section. Now, one cool thing, like maybe like what should I know about buying when buying a vintage. One cool thing here is each one of these could explode into many different topics, and you could maybe write a whole article. I think someone asked, how do you know when you should write a whole other article? And for this, maybe we go sort of higher level because we're talking about vintage acoustic guitars in a general sense. But maybe I realize that a lot of people are asking questions about buying a Kalamazoo acoustic guitar from Reverb, so I can be laser focused on what is available there, and then it would be other research. Like maybe I would look specifically at that guitar model and the history of that guitar line, look at what's available, and maybe mention some of the prices. So, okay. So yeah, I'll just pick what should I know when buying vintage. So, and this is in the acoustic guitar specific area. So, number one, we'll look at so thinking about the condition. So that'll be something to look at. And so I'm going to steal from the question below. So condition and originality. And so those kind of go hand in hand with a couple of these specifics, but I'll go ahead and I'll just list things out. So again, it's good to just get things out of your head so that you can think about them. So we'll talk about the finish of the guitar, and we'll mention or refinish, right? So you can actually refinish a guitar, and that talk about the frets, the bracing, so one of the other things, originality, and we'll call it modification. So sometimes in an acoustic guitar, we'll have a pickup added or something like that. Some of the older ones would have they call it a tail stop. Is that what you call it? I think that's tail stop. Related to condition, it may be cracks, repairs, some other components that we might run into. So not just the frets and bracing, but the tuners. So that's something else to think about. What else? The action, which is the distance from the fretboard to the strings. The fretboard is another thing to look at. What else? Fretboard, strings. I'm just looking back at my guitar. Oh, the pick guard. So all these different details about the condition. Now let's go back to some of the research. Now that I've done a little bit of a brain dump here, we can check out this post. Seemed pretty good and very specific, even though I complained about the length of the lines here. I would want to see it really about 60% of what it is here. So how does it look? Number one, how does it sound? Oh, the obvious one I didn't mention. I was mainly thinking of, buying online, and it's really hard to get that sound, playability. All right. So those, if you're holding the guitar, you can actually get the sense of how it plays and how it sounds like that. But, you know, you you can't do that unless they record a video for you, and even then you only get the idea of the sound. All right, so how does it sound? Speaking of the neck, so oh yeah, you got to look for a straight neck, and they have what's called a neck reset, where sometimes they need to remove the neck and line it up with the body so that the everything's in line there. So that's something else. So neck condition. All right, and neck reset. So that's another thing to think about. They talk about the neck and the truss rod. So the truss rod is a piece of metal that runs through the neck, and it goes from the headstock down to the body of the guitar. It's in acoustic and electrics, but little piece of history here. In the war years between, I think, like 41 and 45, 44, 45, a lot of the guitars didn't have a truss rod. They made a fatter neck. And the truss rod adds stability and then the ability to adjust a little bit. So you can tighten it and change the neck just a little bit. So in that sense, they wanted to save metal and reserve all of that for the war effort back in the 40s. So there's a period, 41 to 45, where many guitars do not have a truss rod in there and they just have a fatter wood neck. So a little bit of history there. So sometimes these guitars don't have truss rods. Sometimes they were just built that way and for a specific reason. Those guitars are sought after. All right. What else has this person mentioned? So we got the truss rod, the space in front and behind the bridge. So we'll talk about bridge stability here. So stability and condition overall. So we're really outlining a ton of stuff here. Depending on the time, I may write a very small section here, just for sake of time. Cracks. So they talk about little cracks and big cracks, and listen to it. They talk about the age and that sort of thing. All right. What else do we have here? Oh, they do mention some lesser known names, some better known. Oh yeah, Guild, K, Gretsch. Nice. It's funny they mentioned Martin. Well, Martin is old, but Taylor is not that old. All right, so looking back through here, trying to see if there's anything else going on. Okay, so pretty good information, and we have a pretty solid outline here. The more you could fill out the outline, the easier it will be to write. So I'll just show you really quick. So right now, just with the outline, it's not going to be a lot of words, but there's 93 words in the outline already. So not a huge amount, but you can imagine if I were to, for these other 5 points or so, if I list out 5 or 6 more things, maybe write a little bit more, then you're in a position where you have maybe a couple hundred words just in your outline. And if I just write one sentence for each one of these here, you end up with the makings of a fairly long article that's really put together well. And I'm only writing one sentence for each one of these in that example, right? Of course, you could write however much you need to write, and you should write however much you need to write. But the example being, if you have a well put together outline and you just think, what's the minimum I can write right now? If you think, hey, if I just write one sentence for each one, you'll build up some momentum, and there's a good chance you're going to write more than just one sentence. So again, like I said, I'll just pick one section here, and maybe what I would do is, what is vintage? Many times I'll just keep it as simple as I could possibly do it. So what is vintage? So I would say, okay, so, and I just made that part up. I'm not quite sure, but technically, vintage guitar is older than 25 years old. But if I was thinking, hey, I want to get a vintage guitar, technically, the other guitar back there, it's vintage. I bought it in, what is it? Not quite. It's not quite. But, if you're looking at a guitar from 1990, for example, technically it's vintage, but it's really, it's not what a lot of people would consider vintage. Now, when you're talking in the 70s, that's when I said, a lot of people will say older than from before 1980, and that'll be vintage. Now, some other people will say, like, I was mentioning, hey, I'm really looking at stuff from the 30s and 40s. All right. So I'm looking at stuff that is, pushing 90 years old. Some of them are, close to 90 years old. So you can mention a few other things here. So I'll say many people in the market, and I'm just making this up, by the way, based on nothing. Many people in the market look for guitars older, or we'll state it differently. Look for guitars made before 1960 to ensure they are getting, old, mature wood. And then I could say, of course, that depends on the make. I'll say some guitar geeks are just looking at pre-war. I'll say, i.e. before 1941 acoustics from Gibson. All right, so I think I'll wrap it up there as far as me writing and you watching me type here. And then I'll field some questions. I think a couple came through here, which is great. And just a quick reminder for everyone here, if you need a refresher on the keyword research stuff, there's a link in the show notes. I did one last week. It was very popular, and I thank all the people for checking it out. So in this one, I'm just going to hop back and show you the steps so you can kind of remember that, just to sort of recap. So you do have the prerequisites of the keyword and the topic, which is why I referred you to the video last week. If you are uninitiated, you probably want to do some light keyword research, some light research on the topic. So you can Google the term, you can Google similar terms, you can look at the people also ask section, you can read Wikipedia, you can find magazines, you can find books, you can watch YouTube videos, do research. It can be as long and detailed as you want, or it could be a quick run through like we did. I looked at 4 different posts or so, threw out one, the others looked okay, read a little bit, and we ended up with some information. Then the main steps are writing the outline. Write that outline. You can even write the outline and then take a break if you want to step away. You come back, and then you can come back ready to write. Maybe you do a little more research if you need more information for specific sections. I do like to do, the research ahead of time if possible. So I have the outline. I realize I need some references or starting points for various topics, and I'll maybe go and do research and then put the links in a spot where I can get to them for the given topics so I can refer to them. That way I'm doing all the research at one time, and when I sit down to write, I actually don't have to go and find stuff. I could just work on writing the content. Sure, I may have to go look at one of the web pages that I found earlier and other sources, but then, you can go and just focus on writing. Again, if you're switching the tasks, or at least for me, if I'm switching the tasks a lot, it breaks my concentration. And then further, as I wrote here, you write, take a break, edit, take a break, edit, write some more. You can do that as many times as you want. You don't have to, edit multiple times. You don't have to take as many breaks. Some people work differently. You don't need to take as many breaks, but I like to step away from it and come back to it. So with that said, that is how you write a blog post. Important part is doing a little bit of that research ahead of time and writing the outline. Once you have the outline in place, you could beef it up. You can write a little bit more with the outline. You can basically just write a little bit here and there and fill out exactly what you have time to do and then come back to it later. All right, let's answer some questions now, and I think I could actually put those on the screen. So, and finally, Zane said how to write the conclusion. I forgot about that. So it's kind of up to you. If you want, you can write a conclusion where you say, in this case, vintage guitars are really fun to get into. You want to make sure you do your research ahead of time and you look at the going market rates to make sure you're not overpaying for something. That said, if you're really in love with a specific guitar and that's the one you want, maybe you have some sort of personal connection to that specific model, specific year, then maybe you want to go for it. So you can kind of wrap it up like that. If you're writing a different type of article, you might not need to really write much of a conclusion. With web content, it's a little bit different than writing an essay or a book or something like that, where you're sort of expected to wrap it up. I mean, a lot of times people will read an article and then they don't even get to the end. So the people that do, of course, they're well engaged with your content. So you can kind of wrap it up in a general way. And based on what your goal with that article is, you can give them a call to action. So if it's an informational article, much like how to buy a vintage guitar, you might have a small call to action like, check out Reverb over here, and you put in your affiliate link. Or if it's a product review type thing, maybe you give a call to action and say, here's the product that I recommend. Here's why. You can go buy it over here. So depending on the kind of article, you should give a call to action. based on what your goal is for the page. Again, if it's informational and you have display ads there, you don't need to give a call to action. You want people to see the ads. You want people to read your article and hopefully click on it so that you earn the ad revenue. Okay. All right. So that's what you can do for the conclusion, and that's what we just answered there. So as we scroll down, NK asks about how do you decide about a separate post from a subheading, and I would say if you have enough information to warrant that, that's one, and then if you know that there's some search volume. I mean, that's the main thing. If people are searching for that specifically, then you may have a case to go ahead and write a separate article for it. I don't have a hard and fast rule. Eric asks about traffic from India. So check the user behavior, the visitor behavior, and see if they're spending much time there. If I haven't seen specifically any spam traffic or like bot traffic from India specifically, but that would be something to look for. If you look at your visitor metrics, you may find that you're actually just ranking in Google there and you're getting traffic. So I would check for spam though. All right. As we scroll down. All right, Masher, what's going on? Peter said, you said they can't hear it unless the seller sends a video. Yep, that would be a good thing to mention in the article. Peter says, how do you manage to pause from writing a post and then continue another day? I'm the kind of person that if I don't have the time to write the whole post, I won't write it. I don't know how to organize myself to write each day for at least 500 words. So that is a good question. Well, depending on what I'm writing, I may do exactly what you mentioned, where I want to have a chunk of time of 2.5 hours so that I can get into the mindset, which may take 30 minutes. The first 30 minutes may be garbage. All right. So that's a reality. It might be garbage. But then after that, I may be super productive. Now, the reason why I mentioned it, Peter, is because if you have the outline in place, you can treat each one of the subheadings or a section as your 500 words or whatever. So you don't have to look at it as a whole. You can just look at the one section. And that's why the outline is really powerful. Now, the fact is, though, some people, I don't have this issue, luckily. Some people have a lot more demands. They have kids, they have a full-time job, they have a lot of other stuff, and they only have like 15 minutes to spare. I don't. I have a shitload of free time. All right. So I can pull together the couple hours if I want to. That said, if you have the concise little one little section, you can just write 100 words, come back to it. If you've done the research ahead of time, you can check out that one section and do it. So that's another advantage of doing the FAQ method. Very easy to do. So Peter, I bet you probably can do it if you force yourself to. Harsh says you're not getting approved by Mediavine or AdThrive. Any tips? Nope, I don't have any tips. I don't use either of those. All right, so I think we're starting to get away from the main topic of today, and I am going to finish up. So I'm going to just answer these couple last questions. So Khalid asks about meta description. I usually don't write a meta description. Some people will say you really should, but Google just picks whatever they want anyway. NK says you have 50 keywords that are yes or no with a maximum of 200 words. Should I group all under a list post or a separate article? I would I'd put them all in one article. Actually, you could pick either one, see what happens. You can always change it. So I would pick one, let it sit for 2 months or something like that, see what happens. I would potentially have a look at the competitors or what is actually ranking now, see what they do, and then make an assessment from there. The good part is you can pick one implementation, do it, see what happens, and then change it to the other, see what happens, and then you could pick the better one, knowing that Google could change how it treats that at any time. But it's one of those deals where you really don't know until you try it. And I've dabbled here or there, and generally I would advise you and other people to, when you have an SEO question like that, what's the most logical for the user? So as a searcher, what would be the most logical way to do it? So that's what I would do. All right, that's it for today. If you're not signed up for the email list, you can go to nichesiteproject.com and enter your name and email. I'll send you all my templates and systems and all that stuff. All right, we'll catch you next week.